If goodness is measured by intention, punishment feels cruel. If goodness is measured by consequence, mercy feels careless. Somewhere between those two ideas sits a disturbing question. Can a life that looks good still end in damnation? If kindness, remorse, and effort are real, then condemnation feels unjust. But if goodness is incomplete, conditional, or self-defined, then judgment begins to feel inevitable. The idea unsettles because it threatens a quiet assumption many hold without saying it aloud. That being decent should be enough. That trying should count. That hell, if it exists at all, must be reserved for monsters. Yet history, faith, and human experience keep circling that darker possibility. What if goodness alone has never been the deciding factor? Consider an ordinary life, lived without spectacle. A person who works, provides, apologizes when wrong, and avoids cruelty. Someone who loves family, helps when asked, and feels discomfort at suffering. No crimes that make headlines. No deliberate harm inflicted for pleasure. A person who would generally be described as good. This individual does not mock faith, nor does devotion define them. They believe in right and wrong, but often on their own terms. They regret mistakes privately, promise to do better, and usually mean it. There is guilt, but also justification. Remorse, followed by repetition. An internal moral dialogue that never quite reaches silence. In moments of reflection, the question of the afterlife surfaces quietly. Not as fear, but as assumption, that a life like this should be safe. That hell, if real, must be reserved for something far worse. But faith traditions across cultures tell stories that complicate this comfort. Stories where judgment is not merely about behavior but orientation. Not just what was done, but what was refused. Not only cruelty, but avoidance. Not hatred, but indifference. The discomfort grows when goodness itself becomes difficult to define. Is it intention, outcome, effort, or alignment with something beyond oneself? And who decides which definition matters after death? Across belief systems, hell is rarely described as a simple punishment chamber. It is often portrayed as consequence rather than revenge, a condition rather than a sentence, separation instead of torture. This distinction matters. Because if hell is separation, then goodness becomes complicated. A person may act kindly, yet remain inwardly distant from truth, humility, or responsibility. A life may appear gentle while avoiding accountability for deeper fractures. Psychology offers a parallel. People can be emotionally generous while avoiding self-examination. They can be polite while remaining resistant to change. They can feel guilt without allowing it to transform them. Faith-based moral philosophy often asks whether goodness is relational or autonomous. Is it something created internally or something aligned externally? Is being good about comparison or about orientation towards something higher? If goodness is self-defined, then it becomes relative. One life measures itself against worse examples and feels secure. Another compares against ideals and feels perpetually inadequate. Both interpretations coexist uneasily. Hell in this framework is not assigned for failing to meet a moral score. It emerges from refusal rather than failure. Not because someone was bad, but because something was persistently avoided. Avoidance can be subtle. Avoidance of surrender, avoidance of uncomfortable truth, avoidance of humility, avoidance of reconciliation that demands more than apology. In this view, goodness without transformation becomes fragile. It soothes conscience without reshaping it. It comforts without confronting. Many traditions suggest that the afterlife reveals rather than corrects, that death does not rewrite a soul but exposes it. If that is true, then the question shifts, not whether a good person deserves hell, but whether a person who never allowed goodness to change them could experience heaven. Psychological studies on moral licensing hint at this tension. People who perceive themselves as good often feel permitted to excuse harmful patterns. Good deeds become shields against deeper accountability. The self-image protects the self, even when growth is needed. From this angle, hell is not a verdict imposed. It is the logical outcome of a posture maintained, a final continuity rather than a sudden reversal. This does not comfort. It disturbs, because it suggests that kindness alone may not be enough, that goodness without openness may still close a door. Yet another layer complicates the question further. What about sincerity? What about those who truly tried yet never found clarity, those shaped by pain, misinformation, or fear? Here, the moral tension intensifies. If judgment exists, it must account for knowledge and circumstance. But if accountability disappears entirely, meaning dissolves. Some traditions propose that hell reflects not cruelty, but respect. Respect for choice carried to its final form, a reality where resistance is honored rather than overridden. If that is true, then hell becomes less about evil actions and more about unyielding self-definition, a place where the self remains sovereign, even when that sovereignty isolates. This interpretation troubles both skeptics and believers, because it removes easy villains, because it suggests that hell may contain people who were loved, admired, and trusted. The unsettling insight arrives quietly. Goodness is not the opposite of separation. Pride often is, not loud pride, not arrogance that insults or dominates, but the quieter kind that insists on self-sufficiency, the belief that effort should be enough, that acknowledgement should be optional, that growth should never require surrender. A good person may still resist being changed by truth. They may prefer improvement over transformation, adjustment over repentance, comfort over reconciliation. In this light, hell is not filled with hatred. It is filled with self-preservation. The question then becomes deeply uncomfortable. Is goodness being used as a bridge or as a barrier? Does it open the self or protect it? Many stories describe judgment not as interrogation, but recognition. A moment where the soul sees itself clearly, without excuses or comparison, where intentions are no longer softened by narrative, where goodness is weighed not by effort but by alignment. If heaven is communion, then resistance to communion becomes relevant. A person may desire peace without relationship, reward without surrender, belonging without vulnerability. Hell, in this sense, is not imposed suffering. It is sustained distance. This reframing removes the comfort of moral averages. There is no curve, no balancing scale of good deeds against bad ones. Only orientation. The paradox sharpens. A good person can still choose isolation, not deliberately, but persistently. Not through cruelty, but through self-protection. And perhaps that is why the question lingers, because it implicates almost everyone. So the question remains, unresolved, and heavy. Can a good person still go to hell? Not because they failed to be kind, not because they lacked empathy, but because goodness alone may never have been the destination. If the afterlife reflects the soul's deepest posture, then behavior is only part of the story. The quieter patterns matter more. What was welcomed? What was resisted? What was avoided until the end? This thought unsettles because it removes certainty. It refuses easy reassurance. It asks whether goodness was a path or a shield. There is no final answer offered here, only a lingering silence. A space where assumptions weaken and reflection deepens. Perhaps the more uncomfortable question is not where good people go, but whether goodness was ever meant to be the final measure.